Welcome to Bunny Trails, a whimsical adventure of idioms and other turns of phrase. I'm Dan Pugh.
And I'm Shauna Harrison. Each week, we take an idiom or other turn of phrase and try to tell the story from its entry into the English language to how it's used today. I didn't follow every moment of basketball as a kid, but I clearly remember Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's final season in 1989. Every arena honored him, not just with applause, but with gifts. A rocking chair here, golf clubs there, even skis. He was still playing, but no longer dominating. The season had become a farewell tour, a tribute to a legendary career nearing its end. That season was his swan song.
Oh, that's interesting. I also, when I think of Swansong, I also think of sports. In my view, though, the thing that pops to mind is Cal Ripken Jr., who played all of these consecutive games, and he never had to go to the injured list or anything, and so he just had this massive streak. He beat Lou Gehrig's streak, and then he decided one day to end that streak on his own. He asked the coach to let him set it out because he wanted to go out on his own terms. And so I remember that as kind of a swan song. And the other thing that comes to mind, and it's not an experience I had, but I see kids have it, having had several kids that went to high school, is like whatever that final musical is of the year, where they kind of, they know that's the last, for many of those kids, that's the last time they'll do a musical, but depending on what they're doing in college. But, for some of those kids, like that's the last time those kids are on stage together, so it's that final show of that senior year feels a lot like a swan song for them too.
Yeah, that's a really neat reference there because I remember that from my own high school career, and it felt different, that last show that you knew it was the last time you were going to be together. So
yeah.
According to Oxford English Dictionary, a swan song is, quote, a song like that traditionally believed to be sung by a swan that is about to die, the last work of a musician, poet, writer, etc., typically composed shortly before death. Later, more generally, any final performance, action, or effort, end quote. The belief that a swan would finally utter sound at the end of its life has been around since at least the early 1500s.
I've definitely heard swans make sounds, and they didn't appear to be dying. So it's weird, but all right.
There is a type of mute swans. This is a very elaborate, unnecessary piece of it, but essentially just swan generally. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That's fine. All right. What do we have in the early 1500s?
So the idea appears in the notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci, where he records observations on nature, animals, and human behavior from around 1500. He writes notes about various creatures and shares random thoughts and poems. This section is written almost as a dictionary. Here is his entry for swan. Quote, the swan is white without any spot, and it sings sweetly as it dies, its life ending with that song, end quote. So here Da Vinci describes the swan's final song as a natural fact. This could be an indication that the belief had already taken hold as accepted wisdom in Renaissance thought, though he did have a lot of his own ideas. So as I mentioned, Da Vinci had various other entries in his notebooks, and we're going to take a look at some of those others in our Behind the Scenes, which airs every Friday on Patreon. You can find that at patreon.com/bunnytrailspod.
I'm excited. Leonardo was my second favorite of the Ninja Turtles, so.
Of course. The term swan song appears in the revised edition of Albion's England, a long poetic chronicle by William Warner, published in 1596. Warner was an English poet and lawyer known for blending myth, legend, and history in accessible verse. Here's an excerpt. Quote, but now must end our swan song. Now the swan himself must end. End quote. They're the phrases used figuratively to signal, a final act or farewell.
Yeah, it's weird because it's definitely seems to be indicating a final act there, but the Oxford English Dictionary said later, more generally, any final performance. But that
Right.
certainly felt like it. Obviously, just because it was one instance of it in 1596 doesn't mean it was widely used in that time frame. But
True. And
that
you'll
is
find
interesting.
there's still a lot of mentioning of the actual swan. Like the swan's still a piece of it as
Right.
opposed,
Like you
yeah.
have to make the metaphor still, or the illusion doesn't hold.
Yeah. The swan song motif appears in The Silver Swan, a madrigal composed by Orlando Gibbons and published in his collection First Set of Madrigals and Motets of 5 parts, published in 1612. The lyrics describe a swan that remains silent until it sings once at the moment of its death. Quote, "The silver swan, who living had no note, when death approached, unlocked her silent throat. Leaning her breast against the reedy shore, thus sung her first and last, and sung no more. Farewell, all joys, O death, come close my eyes. More geese than swans now live, more fools than wise." End quote.
Are they saying geese are more foolish than swans? Are they saying swans are the wise ones
I,
and geese are the fools?
I guess. I mean, that's what it
I
sounds
don't
like
disagree.
he's
I
saying.
mean, yeah, I'm not sure I disagree, but I'm also not a bird scientist. I was gonna say whatever a bird scientist is, but then
Ornithologist?
I know, but then I was about to say that, and then I was afraid, what if I accidentally said orthodontist or something, and I
Oh,
just panicked, and so I just went with bird scientist.
man, I hadn't even considered that could happen
Well, it's close. I mean, it's
there.
ornithologist or orthodont. I mean,
Yeah.
I was afraid. I got scared. I
Okay.
panicked.
So, although the phrase itself isn't used here, the imagery is, it's unmistakable. The swan's final song isn't just referenced, it's the entire point of the verse, showing that the idea it was already well known and it was used in this poetry to talk about broader concepts. The concept also appears in Why Do I, Dying, Live by composer Thomas Bateson, published in his second set of madrigals in 1618. Quote, "Why do I, dying, live and see my life bereft me? Why do I doubt to die and see death only left me? The enlargement of my better self by nature's foe confines my hapless life to never dying woe. Immured in sorrow's hold, I only see the light of all my joys wrapped up in horror's blackest night. Then, like meander swans before my death, in fatal notes I'll sigh my latest breath." End quote. So the swan's final song is used as a poetic image of death itself. Again, that's just more evidence that the idea was pretty embedded in the cultural imagination of the time.
Yeah. Also, if you're not familiar with the concept of a madrigal, I know a lot of high schools use the term, and obviously Encanto had the family madrigal. But yeah, so it's I think it was like an Italian thing, right? Originally, that was like a song for you know 2 or 3, and it was kind of a cappello. But more often, it was used, and especially during the Renaissance, as kind of a short poem, basically that was suitable for being set to music.
Right. I guess yeah, I didn't consider that, but then some other terms similar to you hear aria,
Hmm.
so a madrigal is yeah a type of musical piece. The phrase appears in the title of Ossian Singing His Swan Song, an oil painting by Nikolai Abelgard, created between 1780 and 1782. The work depicts the legendary bard Ossian delivering one final haunting song before death, a visual rendering of the poetic myth of the swan's last song. Here's a description of the piece. Quote, "The aged poet sits surrounded by spectral figures, arms raised and mouth open mid-verse, as if releasing one final utterance into the spirit world." End quote.
That is really interesting. I almost didn't even see the spectral figures there. They're so faint. But, he's got a lyre or a harp like thing in his hand.
Uh-huh.
So, and he's got one hand up like he's preaching almost, and he's just got the other hand wrapped around. I don't think he's playing it like that, but I don't know. But
Yeah, he's kind of like
beautiful flowing white beard, Zeus esque though.
it is, and he's got kind of a garment that's flowing behind him, and you can see a spear across the front of the image there. The phrase appears in The Life of Handel by Victor Schulcher, excerpted in the new publications section of the New York Daily Tribune, November 26, 1857, out of New York, U.S. Here's the section that mentions our term. Quote, in February 1752, Handel produced Jephthah, which was destined to prove the swan song of the great composer. He had already experienced symptoms of blindness, and after submitting 3 times to a painful operation, he found that his sight was irrecoverably gone. End quote. So, swan songs used to mark the song as Handel's final artistic contribution, connecting that term to creative legacy and loss. And that's often the thing that people kind of lean towards, but not necessarily the most common usage of the term.
Sure. Swan Song's not necessarily like their greatest work, it's just like
the
that.
last one.
The final, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, Handel, definitely, I think people know him for some other work.
Yeah. It's just something. The phrase appears in a feature titled Songs of Sentiment in the Daily Morning Astorian, October 26, 1884, out of Oregon, United States, reflecting on the emotional weight of older ballads. Here's an excerpt. Quote, they were the swan songs of beating hearts in many cases, and in their burden of sadness revealed the secret of a troubled life. End quote. Swan songs is used to convey the deeply personal and emotional final expressions behind the music of earlier generations. There may have been some nostalgia going on, but that's not uncommon. They just don't make music like they used to. And I suppose that's always been true.
Yeah, every generation will say this new music isn't as good as what I had.
Right.
But I don't know. I've heard some of the songs that are out now, and some of them are really catchy,
They
Like
are.
when I first heard that song Royals by Lords, anyway, and I was just like, I wanted to hate that song because it's like wasn't the kind of music that I listened to, but I was like, it's so dang catchy. It's so hard, and there's so many songs like that. Not that there haven't always been songs like that, but I don't know. I like my classic rock, but there are some really good songs out these days as well.
Very true. And it makes you wonder, in a few hundred years, will that be akin to, a piece by Handel?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Will you be listening to something by Steve Miller Band and be like, this is classic? Listen,
Like,
Rockin'
wow.
Me Baby, it's a classic.
Just listen to that. The phrase appears in the Washington Times, September 20th, 1937, out of Washington, D.C., U.S., in a back-to-school piece describing the first day of classes for students. Quote, hands folded and feet under the desk, some 90,000 Washington school pupils bawled this traditional swan song to summer as classes opened today. End quote.
Oh, man. I wonder what the swan song was in this case. Was it like an opening statement of some sort, or was it like, the first bell, or did they have a recital or something? Like nowadays they'd say the Pledge of Allegiance or something, but
That's
yeah.
true. They would, yeah.
Interesting.
So it's kind of a, used playfully to mark that ceremonial end of summer break for school kids. It had become so familiar and widespread that it could be slipped casually into everyday descriptions, even something as routine as a first day of school. So definitely not the final act of a of a dying poet.
Yeah. No, but the final act of a dying summer.
True. We have several modern uses to cover, and we'll get to those right after we say thank you to our sponsors.
This episode is sponsored by our amazing patrons on Patreon. And the cool thing about Patreon is it is 100% free to join the Bunny Trails community. We have new things every weekday on the feeds. On Mondays, we have a conversation about what movies, shows, books, podcasts, and whatever else everyone is enjoying. Tuesdays see early access to the week's podcast. Wednesdays have all the links, books, songs, and other content mentioned in the week's episode. Thursday has patrons-only polls. And Fridays are our lightly edited, behind-the-scenes video featuring all the cut content, goofs, and bonus facts you could imagine.
We've got some other pretty cool stuff too, like original digital artwork once a month made by me, and direct access to talk with us. No algorithms getting in the way of what we see or don't see. Plus, you can get awesome name recognition like Pat Rowe does every episode. And our top spot is currently occupied by the amazing Mary Halsig Lopez. You can join the Bunny Trails community for free at Bunny Trails Pod on Patreon.
That's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod.
The phrase appears as the title of Swansong 1945, a collective diary of the last days of the Third Reich, authored by Walter Kempowski and translated by Sean Whiteside. This was published in April 2015. Here's an excerpt describing the book's scope. Quote, Swansong 1945 chronicles the end of Nazi Germany and World War II in Europe through hundreds of letters, diaries, and autobiographical accounts covering 4 days that fateful spring. Hitler's birthday on April 20th, American and Soviet troops meeting at the Elbe on April 25th, Hitler's suicide on April 30th, and finally, the German surrender on May 8th. End quote. Freelance writer Bill Marvel gave a perfect summation in his review of the book, which was published in the Dallas Morning News. Quote, in all, this is a book that can be read comfortably only page by page. Otherwise, it will break your heart. End quote. Honestly, I struggled to read the synopsis or the reviews for this book. I mean, it's a heavy topic and content there,
So what this did for me is challenge something in my brain, and I hadn't even realized it, that I have only ever used the word swan song for something that I was supportive of, right? So
Right.
I became very uncomfortable with the concept of a swan song being associated with Nazi Germany, right, or just Nazis in general,
Mm-hmm.
and so that I was very uncomfortable with it as you were reading it, and I was like, and I had to, I guess, it made me think, I would never have said that swan song held that connotation in my mind that it's a treasured thing that only good should have, right? But I suppose there's nothing about the term swan song that should be discriminating based on whether it's a villainous horrible human in concept or a beautiful work of art. I've just never heard it applied to anything so obviously villainous like that.
Right. I think that the one thing to note about it too is part of that is the swan song concept. There is the significance of what was coming to an end here, and also he wasn't just discussing the Nazi Germany or Hitler, but the time frame in general, like that era coming to an end.
Sure, good
And
riddance to it as well.
yeah, and he also wanted to make an effort. The author wanted to make an effort to give voice to the many people. Not this wasn't it wasn't an effort to share any particular perspective, but instead. The voices of the dead, essentially, is how he labeled it. But he had found a journal of a soldier in the street. This individual survived World War II, and after finding that random journal, he went on a mission of his own to find writings from people who had lived during that time. One modern use of the phrase appears in Swansong, a film directed by Benjamin Cleary, released in 2021. It explores themes of sacrifice, family, and the emotional journey of facing mortality. Praise is reflected in the story of Cameron, played by Mahershala Ali, a husband and father diagnosed with a terminal illness who is given an alternative solution by his doctor, played by Glenn Close, to spare his family grief. Swansong is a powerful emotional journey about how far we go and what we sacrifice for those we love.
Wow, a couple of
So.
really heavy concepts here on the modern uses.
Yeah, definitely. So another modern use appears in Swansong, a 2023 bronze sculpture by artist Koak. This evocative work captures the poignant tension between beauty and finality, reflecting on themes of farewell and transition. The form and the material of Swansong, it kind of invites contemplation on how endings can hold a quiet strength and grace. It's a really beautiful piece in my mind. There's a swan that hangs by one foot upside down from a chain, its wings extended beyond its head, which is dipped down towards the ground. The article 30 Swansong Book Club Questions and Reading Guide by Julianne Bonacour was posted May 22nd, 2024 on the Literary Lifestyle website. It discusses the book Swansong by Ellen Hildebrand. Here's a part of the article. Quote, June 2024's Swansong by Ellen Hildebrand brings an extravagant new couple, the Richardsons, to Nantucket. However, before summer's end, their flashy multi-million-dollar estate burns to the ground, and their personal concierge goes missing. This swiftly thwarts longtime police chief Ed Capanash's retirement plans, who becomes embroiled in the investigation one last time. It's a good book club book for Hildebrand because it blends everything her readers crave into one final narrative. Characters we know and love, Nantucket references, pop culture references, summer fun, drama, romance, mystery, and rich people problems. In addition, she incorporated the most extravagant parties I've ever read about. The Pink and White Party. Book club readers can discuss themes like wealth disparity, community dynamics, personal transformation, and the impact of newcomers on a tight-knit society. End quote. The phrase appears in Swansong's number 6, the finale issue of Swansong's miniseries, published January 10th, 2024. This 32-page mature-rated comic book blends dark humor and parody as it offers a morose take on a beloved children's poetry collection. Quote, mini-series finale, The End of the Sidewalk. The end of the series about endings. Here, the team behind Ice Cream Man creates something only they could, a dark, morose take on a beloved book of children's poems. It's an Ice Cream Man crossover, a parodic play with near-perfect rhyme scheme, the terminal issue of a bunch of terminal issues. The end is here. We hope you enjoy our swan song. End quote. In this case, the phrase is used self-referentially as the creators close the series with a final, thematically fitting issue.
So you've got the cover here that I'm looking at, and it is a obvious parody and done in the styling of Shel Silverstein's Where the Sidewalk Ends.
Yes.
So there's instead of on that one, I believe, it's at the end of a sidewalk and there's, a couple of kids and a dog. With this one here, you've got a swan instead of a dog and a couple of kids, but one of them is a skeleton.
Yeah.
But yes, it's clearly it's stylistically and very very clear that it's a parody of that book cover.
Yeah, it's got almost both an homage and a parody.
Right, yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I have to admit, like, dark humor and parody are two things that I very much enjoy in written words.
Yeah. The phrase appears in Swansong, a documentary film shared by the Center for Contemporary Arts on July 26, 2024. It offers a behind-the-scenes look at the National Ballet of Canada as it prepares a new production of Swan Lake. The film focuses on ballet icon Karen Kane as she directs the company on the eve of her retirement, capturing both the creative process and the dancers' personal lives. Quote, an immersive, behind-the-scenes look at one of the world's leading ballet companies as it mounts a new production of Swan Lake. Ballet icon Karen Kane, on the eve of her retirement, directs the National Ballet of Canada. End quote. So the phrase is used to emphasize that bittersweet transition as Karen Kane prepares to step away from the spotlight.
Interesting. That's really cool.
There's something quietly beautiful about the idea of a swan song. It's not just about endings, but about how we choose to meet them. Whether it's a final game, a last performance, or a moment when everything feels both fragile and fierce, that closing act carries a kind of grace. It makes me think about the moments in life when we know the curtain is falling, not with regret, but with a sense of meaning, even celebration. Maybe the real gift is how we hold those last notes, whatever they may be. That's about all we have for today. If you have any thoughts on the show or pop culture references we should have included, reach out to us on Patreon, patreon.com/bunnytrailspod, or comment on our website, bunnytrailspod.com.
All right, it is poll time. Recently, we asked our patrons, what is your favorite nut for snacking? Cashews took first place, closely followed by pistachios and almonds, and then peanuts. Only a small but mighty group went for mixed nuts, and walnuts didn't get much love at all. Mary said, quote, "My grandma used to buy me a box of cashews from the Nifty Nut House every Christmas. There's something about the texture and flavor that I just love, in addition to the memories." End quote. The Nifty Nut House is an amazingly wonderful place. They are currently on their third generation of this family-owned candy store, and they're known for making their own fudge and roasting their own nuts since they started in 1937. So if you are ever in the Wichita area, make plans to visit the Nifty Nut House. Even Alton Brown, creator and host of the Food Network television show Good Eats, called the Nifty Nut House a national treasure. And I think most Kansans would agree.
Definitely, yeah. Jan added, quote, "I picked pistachios because I like the texture and they are the most fun to open. I'm not as fond of them when they are already shelled. Truth be known, I like all nuts a lot, so the real answer is mixed nuts." End quote. Personally, I love pistachios as well. My very favorite, though, is cashews or almonds with craisins or dried blueberries. It's so good.
I happen to love pistachios as well. I could see why they, were high up on everybody's list. I'm just like Jan. I like the ones that are still in the shell. I'll eat them if they're outside the shell, but I think there's something about separating them and then snacking on them that I really like. It gives me something to do with my hands. I like to do it if I'm just sitting around talking with people, and we're not necessarily eating a meal or something, but shelling nuts while you're sitting there talking is kind of an interesting thing to do, and gives me something to do while we're talking and whatever. So I also like roasted almonds, and I also like peanuts. Obviously, shelled would prefer. I can't eat a whole lot of peanuts if they're not shelled, but like if I shell them, I just pop an occasional ones in my mouth. I can handle that. Honestly, though, I will pass on most other nuts. But I do really like seeds, mostly
Oh,
with the
yeah.
little chunks of cheese. But like if you give me a handful of, say, pistachios and almonds and sunflower kernels and a couple other seeds, and then some
Pumpkin
little,
seeds in there is good.
yeah, a couple, and then give me some of the little, squares or cubes, I should say, of, like a good cheddar and or Colby Jack, or maybe a little bit of pepper jack in there for some spice. Then, yeah, I could make a whole meal out of that little hors d'oeuvre. So, well, as a reminder, our silly polls mean absolutely nothing and are not scientifically valid. And patrons of all levels, including our free tiers, can take part. Head over to patreon.com/bunnytrailspod to take this week's poll. Thanks for joining us. We will talk to you again next week. Until then, remember, words belong to their users.